So we're going to continue here in the Otzer HaIyunim, where we left off on Dalid, and we're up to the Ravid. Now, this Ravid that he quotes here on the left column of Dalid is a commentary on the Baal Amor. And he writes the following: Yesh mitzvah b'shtias kos hachamishi. There's a mitzvah to drink a fifth kos. Ella sheyesh lomar al kos zu halel hagadol. So we have now a fifth kos with its own bracha, and that's halel hagadol. But we know that the fourth kos is on halel. Bir Ravid b'tama davar sheyesh lomar al kol kos bracha halel. Every kos needs its own bracha. The ain't shosin es hakos below amira. Without a bracha, we don't drink the kos. So you see that the Ravid is on that side of the fence that insists that an essential part of the mitzvah dalid kosos is kos shel bracha. It's not just shtiyas dalid kosos, but it's kos shel bracha. And therefore, ain't shosin es hakos below amira. And that again ties into what we said about Rav Soloveitchik, that he was makpid that everyone for the Kos Kiddush would have yayin haroy lenisach al gabi mizbeach. Bishum shlo rotzu chazal sheishtu as hakosos b'li lomar aleim davar shaharei. The Chazal did not want to establish just drinking 4 cups of wine without saying anything over the cup. Shaharei Mashchu achar hashesiya v'yanichu achilas hapesach lenosar. If you're going to just drink 4 cups consecutively, then it might affect your ability to eat the Korban Pesach. And if you don't eat the Korban Pesach on time, it becomes nosar. V'gam bizman hazeh she'ein Korban Pesach. Even though today we don't have to worry about nosar, we don't have the Pesach. Shose es kol kosos rak b'shah shemavarich. Nevertheless, this original takana that you drink kosos after you recite the bracha, that still remains intact. So sometimes the Chazal make a takana, and even if the reason for that takana is no longer relevant, but nevertheless the takana still remains in force. So that if at the time of the Achilas HaPesach, Chazal wanted to avoid just drinking 4 cups, then even Bizman Hazeh, that same chiyuv applies, that we have to recite a bracha before we drink the kos. And that's what he says, Hari, Kol Masha Adam Shose Toch Sudaso Ein Bo Heker Lecherus Lefishu Tzorach Achila. If he were to drink wine during the course of his meal, that would not be a demonstration. It would not be noticeable and recognizable to be derech cherus, as part of the special mitzvah of drinking daled kosos on Leila Pesach, l'fishu tzorach achila, because they drink the wine during the meal. That's because that's what they do. Whatever he drinks during the course of the meal, lo yiftar me'arba kosos, that cannot be ola leminyan arba kosos. And there's no kiyum mitzvah in those kosos that he drinks during the course of the meal. Ella mashiyishta osam shelo b'shas, only that which he drinks outside of the framework of his suda. L'chein tiknu lomar al kos chamishis halal gadol. So on the 5th kos we recite halal hagadol. We don't know what the source is of the Ravid. From whence does he derive this chiyuv of a 5th kos? But we do understand that the Ravid has to attach it to some bracha, and therefore he attaches it to halal gadol. Mavur shekol hakosos chiyuvim umishum shesiya derech cherus, v'gam din habracha hu kidei shenikar hacherus, v'lo yira kistam shesiya b'toch haseuda. So that the brachos here serve a very important function here, because without the brachos, the shtia would not be considered, it would not be upgraded and receive and have the complexion of derech cherus. Nobody would recognize it as derech cherus. He's just drinking it. What sets it up is derech cherus and integrates it into the framework of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, such that now, when he drinks the Kosos, he's fulfilling his mitzvah of Sipur, is the fact that he recited a bracha over the Kos. And each one of the brachos is a part of this mitzvah, this gigantic mitzvah called Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And each one of the Kosos will now have an impact on the Shtia and upgrade it to a Shtia derech cherus. It'll, shall we say, it will penetrate into the Kos, such that now when he drinks it, he's drinking a Kos of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, a Kos of cherus. Now, yesterday we mentioned a very radical approach of the Maggid Mishnah, in which he sort of compares Dalid Kosos to Chanuka, to Ner Chanuka. And he claims that just like the mitzvah of Ner Chanuka is a kiyum of Pirsum HaNes, so too the Arba Kosos is a kiyum of Pirsum HaNes. So it's not just drinking a koshel bracha, but it's Pirsum HaNes. And we discussed yesterday, how could there be Pirsum HaNes if he's not drinking it outside in the public, like in the case of Ner Chanukah, where he lights it, Mi Pesach Beiso U'Bachutz, but at least there's Pirsum HaNes to the Bnei Abayis. Es Dvarav Kosav al Divrei Rambam. He attaches this chiddush to the Rambam. The Rambam writes at the end of Hilchos Chanukah, Afilu ein lo masha yochal, he's so poor that he has to be supported by charity and he can't even eat. Shoel o mocher ksuso. He has to rent out his garment to get some prutos or sell his garment. V'lokech shemen v'neres umadlik, in order to purchase oil for the mitzvah of hadlaka. How does the Rambam know this? Says the Maggid Mishnah, the source for the Rambam, that a poor person would have to sell literally the shirt off his back in order to buy shemen for Ner Chanukah is the Mishnah here in Arvei Psachim regarding Daled Kosos. And the Mishnah states that afilu ani sheb Yisrael lo yifchesu lo me arba kosos shel yayin. There's a requirement that even an ani will have to be supplied with 4 kosos of yayin. And the question is, what is the basis for that chumrah, that even an ani has to be supplied with dalid kosos? In order to achieve the kiyum of Pirsum HaNes. And now we can apply that, as the Rambam does, to Ner Chanukah. Ner Chanukah is the halacha of afilu ani moches ksuso is predicated on an analogy between Ner Chanukah and Dalid Kosos. So Dalid Kosos becomes like the Av, and Ner Chanukah is the Tolda. Shari Pirsume Nisa Shel Chanukah, Adif al Pirsume Nisa Shel Arba Kosos. Even though the source for the Rambam's conclusion about Ani Sheb Yisrael with regard to Ner Chanukah is Dalid Kosos, but nevertheless, Ner Chanukah has even a greater element of Pirsum HaNes than the Dalid Kosos. And we can explain that based on the fact that Ner Chanukah is lit outside of his bayis, for the sake of the passers-by to see his Ner Chanukah, to be mefarsim the Nes. However, the Maggid Mishnah quotes another Rambam in order to prove that Ner Chanukah and its element, its kiyum of Pirsum HaNes, even greater, it supersedes that of Daled Kosos. The Rambam paskins at the end of Hilchos Chanukah, Harei she'ein lo pruta achas, all he has access to is one single pruta, ulefanav, and he has a choice. He can either Kiddush Hayom, he can buy a minimum amount of wine for his mitzvah of Kiddush, or he can buy a minimum amount of oil for Adlakas Ner Chanukah. Which mitzvah takes priority? Should it be Kiddush, or should it be Ner Chanukah? And the Rambam paskins, Makdim liknos shemen lahadlik Ner Chanukah. Ner Chanukah takes precedence. Al hayayin l'kiddush hayom. Now, here's the Kal V'chomer of the Magid Mishnah. Im ner Chanuka odif al kiddush hayom ubi kiddush al arba kosos chayav af ani b'Yisrael is af ner Chanuka chayav af ani sheb'Yisrael. If we find that with regard to kiddush of Daled Kosos, we are obligated, even in the case of an ani, to supply those funds for the mitzvah of kiddush as the first of the 4 kosos, then how much more so in the case of Ner Chanuka, we're going to be mechayev the ani b'Yisrael because Ner Chanuka is greater than kiddush, so that the first kos of the Daled Kosos is equal to and identical with kiddush. And if, with regard to that first kos, there's halacha of afilu ani b'Yisrael, how much more so in Ner Chanuka, where the Rambam has established that Ner Chanuka gets kedima over kiddush. The strange thing is about this Magid Mishnah is the fact that the Magid Mishnah is only relating to the first of the 4 kosos. He doesn't prove that the other 3 kosos have the same status as kiddush, because no doubt the first kos is a very significant upgraded kos insofar as it's a kiyum not only of Daled Kosos, but it's also kiyum of kiddush. And we might have argued that this kal v'chomer that the Rambam, according to the Magid Mishnah, derives to prove that Ner Chanuka is even ani sheb'Yisrael from the fact that the first of the 4 kosos is the kos of kiddush, and with regard to the Daled Kosos, there's halacha of ani sheb'Yisrael. And if that applies to kiddush, how much more so should it apply to Ner Chanuka, which is even greater than kiddush? If he only has 1 pruta, he'll buy shemen for Ner Chanuka rather than yayin l'kiddush. What about the other 3 kosos? So I believe that what the Magid Mishnah is saying is that if you had to identify amongst the 4 kosos, which is the most significant, which has the greatest kiyum, it would be kiddush, because the kos of kiddush has an additional kiyum of kiddush above and beyond the mitzvah of shtiyas Daled Kosos Pirsum HaNes. So with regard to the first of the 4 kosos, you have an overlap of 2 kiyumim. On the one hand, you have the kiyum that's common to all 4 kosos, namely Pirsum HaNes. But on the other hand, what's special and unique about the first kos of the 4 is that you have an additional kiyum of kiddush. And therefore, the argument goes as follows. In the case of kiddush, in the case of the other 3 kosos, even an ani sheb'Yisrael has to be supplied with those other 3 kosos. Because the Mishnah says here at the beginning of Arvi Psachim, Afil Shana b'Yisrael, we have to give him and supply him with 4 kosos, even those kosos, 2, 3, and 4 that don't have the extra kiyum. And if in those cases they're a din of ani, and then we upgrade it to the case of kiddush, then even if you'll give the Daled Kosos the greatest significance that you possibly could by adding A plus B, by adding kiyum of Pirsum HaNes plus the kiyum of kiddush, and we're going to say that afilu ani sheb'Yisrael has to be supplied with Daled Kosos, so then Ner Chanuka, which is even greater than kiddush, which means it's even greater than the top of the 4 kosos, because Ner Chanuka is a Pirsum HaNes that is gigantic, and it supersedes in its chashivas the mitzvah of kiddush. So even if I take the most significant of the 4 kosos of yayin for Leil Seder, namely the first of the 4, which has an overlap, as we said before, the mitzvah of kiddush, Ner Chanuka is still on a greater level because it's greater than kiddush. But you might argue, wait a second, maybe Ner Chanuka is greater than kiddush on a regular kiddush, on any Shabbos. So you have a choice on Shabbos Chanuka between spending your pruta on Chanuka or spending your pruta on Kiddush, so Chanuka is greater than Kiddush. I'm not sure that Chanuka is greater than the Kiddush of Leil HaSeder, because the Kiddush of Leil HaSeder has a double kiyum to it. It has the basic kiyum of Pirsum and HaNes, and on top to boot, it's also Kiddush HaYom. Now, if the Kal Vachomer of the Magid Mishnah is based on a comparison between Ner Chanukah and Kiddush Hayom, and he's assuming that if in Kiddush Hayom on Leil HaSeder we sell the shirt off his back in order to guarantee that he have the yain for Kiddush, then the Magid Mishnah is saying how much more so Ner Chanukah, which is even greater. Maybe not. That's not so. Maybe Kiddush Hayom on Leil HaPesach is greater than Chanukah. But I think what the Magid Mishnah might be implying is that take the other three kosos. The other three kosos don't have that additional element, the dimension of the kiyum of Kiddush, and yet we still have to supply the Ani B'Yisrael with the other three kosos as well. And in that sense, Chanukah certainly is greater. I'm not sure that Chanukah is greater than Kiddush Hayom Leil HaPesach. But certainly Chanukah should be greater than the other three kosos. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the halacha would be if he had to choose between Daled Kosos and Kiddush. Like, let's say, for example, he has matzah for Kiddush, but that's going to cost him X, and he could have used that money, that X, to buy the Daled Kosos. What should he do? Should he buy matzah for Kiddush? According to those poskim who say you could be Otzer with Kiddush on Leil HaPesach with matzah, or Daled Kosos. And it's quite possible to argue, although I don't have any proof for this, that since the Daled Kosos has a kiyum of Pirsum and HaNes, they are on the same madrig as Chanukah that has Pirsum and HaNes, and Chanukah is greater than Kiddush. So to the Daled Kosos, insofar as they too have the commonality of Pirsum and HaNes, they are greater than Kiddush. And now we have the objection of the Lechem Mishnah to the Magid Mishnah. Al divrei Magid Mishnah hikshar Lechem Mishnah lo im din Daled Kosos mishum Pirsumei Nisa im kein eich lomar Rambam midin Kiddush al Shabbos. The Rambam opens up the seventh parak of Hilchas Chametz Umatzah with an equation between Kiddush on Shabbos and the Daled Kosos. Sorry, Rak b'Shabbos she'ein ze din shel Pirsum Nisa demar din shener Chanukah kodem. Avol minayin shehu kodem li'arba kosos sheyesh ben din shel Pirsumei Nisa. So let's see if we can figure out what bothers the mind of the Lechem Mishnah. The Rambam establishes that if he has a pruta for Kiddush Hayom or for Ner Chanukah, he buys shemen for Ner Chanukah, because Pirsum HaNes is greater than Kiddush Al Yain. Rambam midid Kiddush Shel Shabbos. Not sure what those words mean. Eich lomad harambam mi Kiddush Shel Shabbos. Meaning, if Ner Chanukah is greater than Kiddush Shel Shabbos, then Ner Chanukah requires an ani. Shabbos she'ein ze din shel Pirsumei Nisa. Meaning, if you strip the kos shel Kiddush of any additional kiyum of Pirsum HaNes, and you reduce it to the bare bones skeleton kiyum of Kiddush, then Pirsum HaNes of Chanuka supersedes. And Nemar Adin Shener Chanuka Kodem. Ach minayin shu Kodem li arba Kosos. Those we don't know that in the case of Kiddush, even an ani has to sell the shirt off his back in order to get yain for Kiddush. I don't think we know that. What we do know is that the ani has to be supplied with arba kosos minat tzedakah. So the Magid Mishnah's logic claims the Lechem Mishnah is faulty because the Magid Mishnah understands in the Rambam that Ner Chanuka is derived from Dalet Kosos. But how does he know that? We know that Ner Chanuka is greater than Kiddush, insofar as Ner Chanuka has Pirsum HaNes, but that aspect of Pirsum HaNes exists in Arba Kosos. So if the Mishnah establishes that for the sake of Arba Kosos, we will dig into the Tamchui, into the community charity chest, in order to guarantee that the ani could fulfill the Arba Kosos, that doesn't necessarily prove anything about Ner Chanuka. See, what I don't understand is that even within the context of the Lechem Mishnah's argument, let's say we don't have a Kal V'chomer. We can't say that, well, Ner Chanuka is greater than Kiddush, and Dalet Kosos has Kiddush in it. So therefore, certainly, insofar as Ner Chanuka is greater than Kiddush, we would sell for the sake of the ani, etc. According to the argument of Lechem Mishnah, you might have an equation here between Dalet Kosos and Ner Chanuka, insofar as they both have this aspect of Pirsum Nisa. So maybe the fault of the Magid Mishnah is that he introduces the Rambam about Pruta Achas, who's Magdim Shemen L'Kiddush. Because that, according to Lechem Mishnah, is not going to justify that the Rambam could jump to the conclusion that even an ani will sell the shirt of his back for Ner Chanuka, just like we do in Dalet Kosos. I mean, the fact that Ner Chanuka supersedes Kiddush, okay, that's because Kiddush doesn't have that additional aspect of Pirsum HaNes. But to derive the ani halacha in Ner Chanuka from Dalet Kosos, how do you know that? I mean, the Kiddush of Shabbos doesn't tell you a thing. So basically, I think what's happening here is that the Lechem Mishnah is striking down the Kal V'chomer of the Magid Mishnah. Call it a Tzad HaShoveh because both Arba Kosos and Ner Chanuka share the common kiyum in both cases of Pirsum Nisa. The only thing is, the Magid Mishnah says that Pirsum Nisa shel Ner Chanuka adif al Pirsum Nisa shel Arba Kosos. I'm just going to take out a Rambam. I want to see this Magid Mishnah inside. Just give me a second. Loch Yud Beis. He writes here, Nira shalomdu mimashin is bayer, v'perek zayim ilchas chometz u'matzah afilu oni b'Yisrael lo yifchos midalid kosos. Vatam mishum Pirsumei nisa. V'kol shkem in Chanuka de odif mi kiddush hayom. The Maggid Mishnah does not say that Ner Chanuka is odif midalid kosos. So that's a quote here in the Otzer HaIyunim, but it's not in the Maggid Mishnah itself. The Otzer HaIyunim says on the top of page Hey that Pirsumei nisa shel Ner Chanuka odif al Pirsumei nisa shel arba kosos. Those words do not appear in the Maggid Mishnah. Enochinami, the Maggid Mishnah, is definitely upgrading the status of Ner Chanuka because it's odif mi kiddush hayom. That's in Halacha Yud Gimel, which we read before. And Ner Chanuka is greater than kiddush hayom because it has the additional element of Pirsumei nisa. So somehow the Maggid Mishnah, which I don't know how he did this, he assumed that if Ner Chanuka is so great that it trumps Kiddush, then we have a right to derive the halacha of Ani from Daled Kosos. Just think if we can figure this out. The Kolshkein B'ner Chanuka, says the Maggid Mishnah, the Adif Mikiddush Hayom. The Adif Mikiddush Hayom. Let's figure this out. The Adif Mikiddush Hayom. I suspect that the Maggid Mishnah, what's Maggid Mishnah's methodology here? What is he trying to accomplish? That within the framework of Daled Kosos, we have Kiddush Hayom. And if we would pinpoint and isolate the Kiddush of Daled Kosos, that dimension of Daled Kosos, then certainly Ner Chanuka is greater. That we know. But now the question is, how do you know with a Kal V'chomer that Ner Chanuka is greater than Daled Kosos? Again, it's true that one of the Daled Kosos is Kiddush, but still, that only enhances and upgrades the significance of Daled Kosos. So to learn from Daled Kosos, again, we're going to, as we said before, we're going to sell for the Ani, even where there is no kiyum of Kiddush, even with the basic nitty-gritty kiyum of Daled Kosos in the next three Kosos. That also is included in the halacha of Ani b'Yisrael, for the sake of the last three Kosos. So how does the Maggid Mishnah derive a Kal V'chomer that if Ner Chanuka is greater than Kiddush, that's what the Lechem Mishnah is bothered by. It says Kol Shkein B'ner Chanuka. And how do you know Kol Shkein B'ner Chanuka? So it could be that the Maggid Mishnah assumes that Kiddush itself is greater than Daled Kosos. So that's what I asked you before. what would be if he had a choice between Kiddush and Daled Kosos? Like, for example, if he was reciting Kiddush on Matzah. And he has a choice now between Daled Kosos and Matzah. The truth is, I don't know if that would be a reality, because if he has money for Daled Kosos, then he'll be Mekayim the mitzvah Kiddush as well. Why is it an either or? How could I conjure up an image of an either or, either Kiddush or Daled Kosos? Maybe it means that if he uses up the money for Daled Kosos, he won't have money for Kiddush next Shabbos. Maybe, I don't know. Although that's hard to believe, that you'd have to calculate what's going to be next Shabbos. Like, for example, let's say Yontif, the 15th of Nisan is on a Thursday. So Thursday night, he buys himself Daled Kosos, and Friday night, as a result, he won't have money for Kiddush. Right? He can spend his last pruta for Daled Kosos, but he won't have money for Kiddush tomorrow. So if he spends only, let's say, 5 prutos for the first of the 4 kosos, he'll still have 5 prutos in his pocket to buy Kiddush for Friday night. But once he spends his money on all 4 kosos, that's 5 times 4 is 20, he's left with absolutely nothing for tomorrow night, for Friday night's Kiddush, forget Yain for Kiddush. So what does he do in that case? Where he realizes that as a result of spending his money on Daled Kosos, he's going to have to forfeit the mitzvah of Kiddush. And let's say he doesn't have pas, whatever. Pas is not an option. So what would be greater, Kiddush or Daled Kosos? Shall we say Kiddush or the last 3 of the Daled Kosos? So I think the Maggid Mishnah would argue, but I don't know from whence he derives this conclusion, that in that case, Kiddush would take precedence and would trump the last 3 of the 4 kosos. Now, let's forfeit the last 3 kosos for the sake of Kiddush. Kosos have it kiyum of Pirsum HaNes, but it's not that high level of Pirsum HaNes that could trump Kiddush. Mashentein ner Chanuka, that trumps Kiddush. So for the sake of ner Chanuka, he'll be left with no Kiddush. In that case, we only has a pruta. In the case of the 3 Daled Kosos, he'd have to put away those prutos of the last 3 kosos in order to supply himself with yain for Kiddush. I don't know. Sorry, I still don't see how the Maggid Mishnah knows that. However, we do have a chiddush here from the Sokachava, the Avnei Nezer, and I'm not sure if he's going to satisfy our intellectual curiosity here as far as the objection of the Lechem Mishnah to the Kal V'chomer, the Maggid Mishnah. He says, Kavodas HaMaggid Mishnah Sharamam Lomad Es Dino Bekal V'chomer Me'arba Kosos V'hu Sharayesh Lahakshos Madua Ner Chanuka Kodem LeKiddush Hayom or Kiddush Hayom who we did Pirsum Nisa Shu Pirsum Shal Brias HaOlam Kiddush HaOlam Yesh Me'ayin. That's the most pella of all the Nisim, even greater than the Nisim of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Okay, this is almost a philosophical position here of the Avnei Nezer. V'hosif Avnei Nezer. She'ein lomer shenisa yitzias Mitzrayim heim litzorch Yisrael ve'em chashuvim yosem asher nes brias ha'olam. Not sure why he's emphasizing here Yitzias Mitzrayim. We're talking about Ner Chanuka. What does Ner Chanuka have to do with Yitzias Mitzrayim? Ner Chanuka takes precedence over Kiddush. So he's asking, but Kiddush also shares that element, that dimension of Pirsum HaNes, Pirsum Brias HaOlam. I guess he's assuming that in the light of the postulate of the Magid Mishnah, that even Dalid Kosos has a kiyum of Pirsum HaNes. Which Nes are we talking about? Yitzias Mitzrayim. But nevertheless, Frekti Avnei Nezer, Kiddush HaOlam and Kiddush HaYom should take precedence because it's even a greater Pirsum HaNes. Ein lo mashenisa Yitzias Mitzrayim l'torch Yisrael, v'im chashuvim yosem asher nes brias ha'olam. Period. Lachen. Ner Chanuka, v'lachen, I'm sorry, this is all part of the answer that he's rejecting. V'lachen Ner Chanuka kodem l'kiddush, hari kol ha'olam lo nivra b'shvil Yisrael. V'kei brias ha'olam, hu nes shenasa l'tzorch Yisrael. U'madu ha'kiddush nidche mipnei Ner Chanuka, v'tiretz Avnei Nezer, shener Chanuka choshev yosem mikiddush hayom mipnei shu pirsum nes la'acherim. This might have to do with what we spoke about, the fact that Ner Chanuka is lit on the outside of his house. Mashein b'kiddush einenu din lefarsem la'acherim el lefarsem li'atzmo, or we might add lebnei beso. Al pi yisod zeh hu bir shedin arba kosos shoda mikiddush sheshayni on mitzvos shebalel aseder sheim lefarsem lebanav lebeso d'chsiv yigaret lebincha. So he's saying here that Kiddush also has a kiyum of Pirsum HaNes, but it's only li'atzmo. It's not libnei beso, because you don't have yigaret lebincha. Arba Kosos is one step further because it's even Pirsum libnei beso, because it says yigaret lebincha. And now we get to the highest level of Pirsum HaNes on this hierarchy, on this ladder, and that's going to be Ner Chanuka. Al pizeh bir Avnei Nezer es divrei HaMagid Mishnah shu sover sharam alome kavachomer arba kos Ner Chanuka mishum sha'af sheshneim hem idin Pirsum HaNes mikom makom Pirsumei Nisa shel Ner Chanuka lechol bnei Rishus HaRabim Pirsumei Nisa shel arba kosos hu rak lebnei beso. Okay, so why do you introduce Kiddush? Why doesn't the Magid Mishnah just simply say that Ner Chanuka is greater than Arba Kosos? Of Pirsum HaNes. This Pirsum HaNes li'atzmo is Kiddush. Pirsum HaNes libnei beso is Dalid Kosos. And Pirsum Nisa libnei Rishus HaRabim in Ner Chanuka, which makes it the greatest of them all. So again, what is the Magid Mishnah proving from the fact that if you only have one pruta for either Kiddush or Ner Chanuka, you buy Ner Chanuka. So Ner Chanuka has a greater Pirsum HaNes than then whatchamacallit, then Kiddush. And we don't know that for an ani we would sell the shirt off his back for Kiddush. Let's assume that we would not. And that's because, according to the Avnei analysis, although Kiddush has an element of Pirsum HaNes, it's inferior to Ner Chanukah. So whereas in Ner Chanukah, we're going to sell the shirt, but not in the case of Kiddush. Now, how do you know that in Ner Chanukah you sell the shirt off your back? If in Dalet Kosos you sell the shirt off your back, and that's because the Pirsum HaNes of Dalet Kosos. So then, Kolshkein in the case of Ner Chanukah, which has a greater Pirsum HaNes, but I don't understand still why I guess the Kal Vachomer here is directly from Arba Kosos to Ner Chanukah. The detour that the Maggid Mishnah takes to introduce Kiddush is just to prove to you that although both Kiddush and Ner Chanukah have elements of Pirsum HaNes in common, but the elements of Ner Chanukah's Pirsum HaNes is made up of three different variables. It's Liatzmo, Libnei Beso, and Lirshus Harav. So we see that once you enhance and jack up the level of Pirsum HaNes, then it becomes greater and supersedes it in the halachic obligations and responsibilities. And therefore, when we analyze the various dimensions of Pirsum HaNes in Kiddush, in Dalet Kosos, and finally in Ner Chanukah, we're able to set up a hierarchy, and therefore Kal Vachomer, because Ner Chanukah is even greater of Pirsum HaNes than Dalet Kosos. So therefore, if in Dalet Kosos we sell the shirt off our back, and we have to supply the ani with Dalet Kosos, then how much more so in the case of Ner Chanukah? Okay, it's a beautiful structure in the Avnei. It's a little bit of a push in the language of the Maggid Mishnah. He says, "Laman mimashin isbayer behilchas chametz umatzah shafilu ani shebYisrael lo yifchos b'dalet kosos latam mishum pirsunis v'kol shkein b'ner Chanukah." And here, if I was the Avnei, I would have written the adif Dalet Kosos, but the Maggid Mishnah writes the Adif mi Kiddush. And according to the Avnei, we have to reinterpret the Maggid Mishnah. It's not that the Kal Vachomer is from Kiddush, but rather we're using Kiddush to set up it's like a springboard to set up a hierarchy of different levels of Pirsum HaNes. And that's going to allow us to make the Kal Vachomer from Dalet Kosos to Ner Chanukah. So if we go back to the Lechem Mishnah in the previous paragraph, and we saw that the Lechem Mishnah's problem was Eich Lomar Arama Midin Kiddush Shel Shabbos, Harei b'Shabbos Ein Zeh Din Shel Pirsum HaNes. So the Lechem Mishnah would agree that you could derive conclusions about Ner Chanukah from Kiddush if Kiddush also has an element of Pirsum HaNes. But in the framework of the Lechem Mishnah, he understood that Kiddush is completely devoid of Pirsum HaNes. And therefore, since according to the Lechem Mishnah, we've completely omitted any discussion, we bracketed the discussion about Kiddush, then what you're left with is to derive Ner Chanukah from Arba Kosos. And therefore, the Kal Vachomer of the Maggid Mishnah falls apart, because in both cases of Dalet Kosos and Ner Chanukah, we have that common element of Pirsum HaNes. So call it a Tzad Shaveh, but don't call it a Kal Vachomer. Whereas the Avnei says that once from Kiddush we derive this hierarchy of Pirsum HaNes, now we have a right to establish a Kal Vachomer between Ner Chanukah and Dalet Kosos. So where do we get up to? We got up to Kosav HaRamah. We're up to the Ramah. So Mirza Hashem, now we'll have Daf Yomi. And for that, I have to go downstairs.